lawyer representing one of the cops who murdered George Floyd in broad daylight, Officer Lane to be specific, is floating a potential defense of the cop. And so what is that defense likely to be? This was reported by the Los Angeles Times, and it gives you a sense of how defense attorneys like to use any trace of any substance in the victim's system in order to have reasonable doubt or provide a seed of reasonable doubt so the defendants don't get convicted. So Earl Gray, yes, that is his name, is the attorney representing Officer Lane. And he tells the Los Angeles Times, none of these guys, even Chauvin, actually killed him. He killed himself. That is a direct statement from the attorney. The Times reports that free to speak publicly since a judge lifted a gag order on all parties in the case, attorney Earl Gray said he plans to argue that Floyd died from an overdose of the powerful opioid fentanyl and an underlying heart condition. Gray was also, by the way, part of the legal team that won the acquittal for the cop who shot and killed Philando Castile, which is honestly not a good sign. But he does plan on using the toxicology reports and the autopsies to help build his case. But really, both the toxicology reports and the autopsy can be used by the prosecutors as well. Because Floyd was pinned to the ground, there's no question about it, and he was heard saying, "I can't breathe," 6 times. Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck, by the way, for 9 minutes and 30 seconds, which is 44 seconds longer than prosecutors initially alleged. So that's actually a new piece of information here. And the autopsy conducted by the county medical examiner's office found that the death was caused by cardiopulmonary arrest while being restrained by law enforcement officers. A second postmortem examination led by Dr. Michael Baden, an expert hired by the Floyd family, concluded that he was killed by asphyxiation. So I have some more details, Cenk, but I wanted you to jump in.
Yeah, he killed himself by having a throat. And once we crushed his throat, well, he died. So I guess that's his fault, right? For needing oxygen to live. So that is a horrible defense. And they actually do have a good defense, believe it or not Chauvin. But I'll explain that in a second. But look, you are not doing yourself any favors if you're a lawyer for those cops and you tell people, whatever, yeah, you saw with your own eyes 9 minutes or 30 seconds of that guy kneeling on George Floyd's neck, and you saw him die with your own eyes because of it, live. We all saw it. No, don't believe your lying eyes. It was George Floyd's fault. He killed himself. Okay, I mean, it's too barbaric for words. So now, what on God's green earth could be their defense? Well, there's a mild defense of Lane, and I don't even think it's mild. I'd be surprised if he was convicted. I'm not saying he should or should not be convicted. I'm just saying that it's very hard to convict overall and very hard to convict a cop. And Lane did ask Chauvin to get up off his neck, which is bad news for Chauvin because even his fellow cop was like, "Get off his neck," and so that's going. And they called him a hospital, called him an ambulance. So Lane has a much better case than Chauvin does. Now, when it comes to Chauvin, their best defenses, and the lawyers have started to do this. They're like, this is in the training manual. They have pictures from the training manual of cops kneeling on people's necks. And that's what I've been telling you for over a decade now. We keep arresting the cops and then get surprised when they get let off because their defense is, what do you mean? That's my job. My job is to kill people who I feel like killing. And they told me to target blacks and Latinos. I targeted blacks and Latinos. They told me to kick the living crap out of them and kneel on their neck. So I kicked the crap out of them and kneeled on their neck. And I got rewarded, I got promotions. I got, in the case of Chauvin, 18 different complaints. And I was never told that it was wrong. I kept getting rewarded for my actions. So
yeah, I wanna.
The police department told me to abuse black people, and that is true. It is true. So that's why we have to change the police departments and their culture and their training. But none of the politicians will say it. It's easy to say, oh, I feel so bad for black people. And oh my God, that was a bad apple and a bad cop, but I'm sure all the other cops are lovely. But then they don't do anything about it. And that same training is gonna kill more minorities throughout this country.
I actually wanted to give you the specific details of what the training indicates, because the wording even acknowledges what choking someone would do, right? And so here's what the Times reported. In his July 7th motion, Gray included Minneapolis police training material on how to deal with an uncooperative suspect in handcuffs. A restraint position illustrated in a photograph closely resembles the method the officers used. The instruction material also includes a warning. Sudden cardiac arrest typically occurs immediately following a violent struggle. So they have the images of what they're trained to do included in the training material, with this disclaimer, with this warning that just perfectly acknowledges what's likely to happen. And that's exactly what happened to George Floyd. Obviously, he didn't survive it. And I think you're right, Cenk. Remember, when it comes to the burden of proof, I mean, it's a pretty significant burden, because if there's any reasonable doubt, then the jury cannot convict the cop, in this case, Officer Lane, right? And so that's what the defense attorney is really relying on, planting that seed of reasonable doubt. And by the way, a legal expert also spoke to the LA Times and said this is not a slam dunk for the prosecution and not an easy case, especially for the higher degree homicide charges. If this case goes to trial and an officer testifies on his own behalf, it is possible there is reasonable doubt there for jurors.
So what drives me crazy is that there's two large camps. One large camp is, I don't care what the police training is. I just want those particular police officers to go to jail. Okay, then there's the camp that says, well, the training manual says they should do it, so they're not guilty and they should go and they should be celebrated. How about the other camp, the camp that goes, well, then if the police training tells them to murder people, it even says this could lead to their murder, right? It could lead to sudden cardiac arrest, and then it tells them to do it. Then maybe we should retrain all of the police in this country not to murder us. But that camp is tiny. That's the smallest camp in the country, because it holds almost no politicians. No, if you go to say, hey, look, guys, and it's not about the individuals. Progressives aren't saying, for example, and I'm not saying that everyone who's a cop is a bad guy. That's crazy talk, okay? I'm saying the system is wrong, and it teaches them to be bad people. It teaches them to use overwhelming force. It teaches them to abuse people. It teaches them that certain lives are not worth as much as other lives. You think they tell them formally or informally, for example, in LA, oh, go to Beverly Hills and use chokeholds and put your knee on their necks all over Beverly Hills? Never, never, not once. Do they say that in Compton and in South Central, etc.? All the time, right? And so if you can't see that, you're trying not to see it, which is 100% of the Republican politicians and 98% of the Democratic politicians. If you don't reform all of this policing, we're gonna have murder after murder, and everybody's gonna keep acting surprised. Want to win a free electric scooter? Well, our partners at Aspiration and Zoom Electric are making it possible. All you have to do is head to tyt.com/greensummer for your chance to win.